When Reverend Prosper Isiche decided to answer the call of God upon his life, he knew he had to let go of his own plans.
Even if they were around ministry, but there were other ways I thought I was going to approach ministry, based on the things I felt God was leading me to do. But to abruptly hear from God, start TCNI, start, it's time for you to start. And I was asking, start what?
Then he remembered a deep burden God had placed in his heart so many years ago. A burden that will determine the next chapter of his life.
God began to place a nudge in my heart about young people, about revivals in his body, and about the Great Commission.
Prosper felt unprepared for the task ahead, but in obedience took a bold step of faith. And in 2007, the Threshold Christian Network International, TCNI, was inaugurated.
So it was a very humble beginning. Inexperienced people, fears, people were distracted, people who didn't even believe in us or wanted to discourage us. Yeah, but in all of this, we're thankful to God today.
I have vivid memories of everything, how we had to run around. We drove back and forth into Woji, picking up one thing after the other, all in an attempt to get that whole place set because we're a two-man committee.
He was very courageous because it's one thing for God to call you, it's another thing for you to do what God has told you to do. But Prosper, right from that time, stayed focused on what God has called him to do in mobilizing young people, churches for missions advancement.
Soon, work began in earnest with a mission to equip young Christian leaders to crush their threshold of emergence as effective holistic practitioners in world evangelism through leader development and missions mobilization.
I can say that with the first few years we began to see them. In fact, by 2008, a year later, the Lord opened the door for us to be in Ghana for 6 weeks to go and do some work, and then that was even the beginning of international ministry, earlier than we ever thought about that.
I'll say in 3 words, TCNI, Threshold Christian Network International. 1 is God's project. And secondly, I would say is God's own masterpiece. And thirdly, I would say is God's own initiative.
I think the church is better by the grace of God through the contributions of TCNI. Many more young people have been mobilized for missions, and many are still in the process of being mobilized through the various programs and the engagements that God has used TCNI to facilitate in the last few years.
An amazing thing about TCNI is how I've seen lives transformed. You see a young man who walks into one of our meetings, because we usually have campaigns, we go to states, ministries, who want our services in quotes, and then we have times to reach out to a lot of people, and then we see transform lives. And you see a person who didn't think that he could do anything for the Lord, but he encounters us by the mercy of the Lord, and the next moment we hear that such a one is planting a church in a remote village. Those are amazing things for us in our minds.
In order to fully develop and nurture the giftings of these young leaders, preparing them to reach the nations with the gospel of Christ, TCNI launched the Manifest Project, an initiative which is considered one of its biggest accomplishments in the last 10 years.
In 2012, I was invited to Kenya, in Nairobi. And when I was there, one of the simple sessions, a brother from the US, Dean Carson, was making a simple presentation from Patrick Johnstone's book on the future of the global church, and shows a little map on the unreached people groups, how much God had helped from 1900 to 2000 to 2010, and then there was a prediction for 2050. And I saw that the unreached people groups were going to remain unreached. We're only going to be a maintenance generation. So that really altered the initial design for Manifest, that we had to drive the missions trust so keenly among these young leaders. To say how we're going to alter this map, that in 2050 the light of the gospel will be shining everywhere across the globe. And so that was the beginning point of the Manifest. So we now had that rich missions basis alongside leadership.
TCNI grew in leaps and bounds. But like every other God-given vision, it had its own share of challenges.
We lost one of our volunteers at a point who was working with us. He had some kind of cancer, David, of blessed memory. So wonderful. We were working together, preparing for the Francophone world, and it pleased the Lord to call him home. So those were some of those tough times that we could imagine. We've seen some board members relocate, some pull out, maybe unofficially, and a couple of them. But in all, we've had transitions. We've supported a lot of churches to a point that in the work, to a point that it looks like it's detrimental to TCNI, physically, but ultimately enriching.
I remember our Manifest One project, the very first time. We started that project on a zero balance in our accounts, but we had over £1 billion in faith, believing that the Lord was going to help us deliver this project. And let me say, we had started the project, we started the program, was already running before a partner ministry from the US that the president got involved with along the line sent us some funds. And the amazing thing was that it usually take a longer period of time when funds come from abroad to the country, but this came just at the nick of time.
Yeah, funding has been a big challenge. Like I said, the Manifest 2 projects were aborted because there were no much funds. So I think in this part of the world, people are so engrossed in their local churches, which may not be too wrong. Yeah, and sometimes people don't even have the vision for missions or think it's a big priority to develop young people because it's quite expensive. So sometimes they don't even want to connect and understand what you're talking about. But we also understand the dynamics in this part of the world that credibility is built over years. So the more they see you credible, the more you may have resources.
In celebration of TCNI's 10th year anniversary, some of its staff had a couple of things to say about Reverend Prosper and the ministry as a whole.
I know I have faith, but I've never seen a man who has faith like my husband. He can tell you this is going to happen and you will saying, are you sure? He will just tell you yes without looking back or saying that there's something going to obstruct it, but he wants to say yes and that's it. So I'm so happy today saying TCNI is 10, and in the course of our celebration we have a baby Nathan, and it's a thing of joy too.
Working with TCNI, it has actually created an avenue for me to discover more about God. Yeah, before I got into TCNI, I have built a level of fellowship with God, but getting into TCNI has opened another dimension of fellowship, which has impacted my personal life.
This is how we can progress.
Reverend Prosper is a graced man. I must say he's graced by God. And he's a man of this generation. He's a young man who also believes in young people. He's called by God and believes in young people. He's a man full of wisdom. He's a man full of insight.
TCNI gave me the platform to give expression to the calling and the giftings of God upon my life. I could see clearer than when I began, and I could understand what the Lord has been doing with me. So one thing that TCNI has helped me achieve is clarity of purpose and vision.
You look back now and you know God has been with us in TCNI, and we are so thankful, we are so grateful to God. So a lot of emotions arising as a result of these 10 years.
Prosper is grateful for a lot of things, especially how far God has brought TCNI. But he says he still has one desire.
We desire to follow the Lord into the nations. We desire to keep listening to him. The little we can understand now, we perceive in our hearts, we see for the clear future, is that we are seeing at least our presence in 10 countries effectively in Africa to begin to drive the work intensively in the coming 10 years. It's also our desire and our hope that we should have direct contact either in training or in teaching or in mobilization with at least 20,000 young people young Africans and maybe even beyond. We want to see more partnerships developed globally in our ministry. Of course, looking at some of the little things in our heart, we want to see our staff strength grow, our volunteer strength grow. We want to see deep influence, deep work happening in the coming years that we have. We want to also see resources available for the work. We're envisaging over half a billion naira to be spent in the next 10 years, at least at the minimum. So we are very much hopeful. We want to also have strong partnership with at least 200 local churches in Africa and about 50 organizations, both Christians and governmental. So those are the things we are looking forward to in the coming years. To develop basic tools that will be useful for church, schools, young people, and of course make all of those available electronically and physically and in an impactful way.